Hello YouTube and welcome back to another video on Lex Home Creations. Today we're going to build the ecopoxy headquarter panel here in the reception using 13 different metallic resins and clear resin and life edge. If you want to see how it's done, stay connected, let's do it. So the very first thing we have to do is to cut it down to the sizes that we want the life edge to be. Now you have to be careful using the track saw and crooked lumber. That's why I stopped short here and used the Japanese saw to finish that cut off. Now that the piece is a lot shorter, it's a lot easier to work with. What we did here now is we marked out the center or the location where I'd like to have the separation, and again used the track saw carefully, passing multiple times until we went all the way through. Now because the track saw didn't go the full depth, we marked it on the other side and finished it off by flipping and then cutting it through. Then it was time to mill this thing flat. But I'm going to explain myself first what's happening here right now in case you haven't seen a setup like this. So all that this is basically it's going to help me to flatten out one side. It can do both sides, but it's just for one side to get it perfectly flat. Then we can flip it around, go to the planer and get it parallel. At this point, there's nothing really complicated about it. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel, that's why I didn't show you the whole build. But basically all we have is we have this beautiful flatbed. We got our crooked lumber in here locked in with shims instead of screws to make sure it is in here as it is, because I don't want to suck it up to the straight bed and then we'll run it flat, take the screws out and then going to retwist again. So basically we just locked it in with some shims, that's it. And then this table here slides along the bed. It's got the aluminum profile L shapes here that will make sure that this is not going to go anywhere else other than doing this movement. We got a couple or 4 screws that will help to lock the router or make it stop short before it touches this guy. We oversized this guy on purpose so I can use it for multiple projects. That's why I just put some manual stoppers in there so I can use this for multiple projects. Anyway, so at this point we're gonna run this flat. Once it's flat, we can take it over to the planer, get it perfectly parallel, and that was pretty simple. So again, I'm really excited. It's my first time doing it myself, so let's see what it turns out to. Let's have some fun. Now this very specific step took about 4 hours to get both slabs perfectly flat, but let me tell you something. I don't know if I'm the only one, but what I do notice is anytime I do things like exactly what you see right now, I completely lose track of time and even of the surroundings, and I'm so involved and I enjoy it so much. I feel very relaxed after a step like that. Anyways, once we had one side completely flat, we cleaned the bed and flipped it around, did the same thing all over again. 10 seconds later. I'll give you quick evidence how nice and flat everything is. So it's touching everywhere. Perfect, like it couldn't be any better. This is even better than perfect right now, although perfect is the ultimate. Okay, anyways, let's flatten this guy out. And here we are again, just flattening, and again, totally losing dimension and track of time. With both pieces perfectly straight and flat, it was time to figure out a layout, how I wanted things. And once I was satisfied and happy with what I saw, it was time to cut the casting form in where we would put the slabs in and pour the resin. We used 5/8 melamine for that application. Now if you want to make your life a little bit easier, spend the extra time now. Use tuck tape on the melamine, which will really allow the epoxy resin to come so much off easier later on once it's cured. Now finally it was time to chop it down to the exact size to what we built or cut the form. If you're trying to run screws into melamine sideways, into the grain, it doesn't really have a grain, but you know what I'm trying to say here. Without pre-drilling it, most likely it will splinter, so that's why I pre-drilled it and then put screws in. Also make sure you clean your life edge so that the resin can properly adhere to the life edge, and then put it into the form. Now I knew I needed to stretch out 13 equal spaces throughout this run, so I'm using the circle tool to see if I need to add or subtract the distance, and run the circles until I had 13 spaces, and then transferred them onto the tape. I'm hoping that makes sense. Now here came the tricky part. That's the one that really got me excited, because I don't know if it's going to work out or not, but I really wanted to try. So here we are just creating a bunch of barrier basically that will hold the resin in separate rooms until it's almost ready for curing, and then we'll take the tape out later. What I was hoping for is that when I pour the resin, and about 8 hours is when it starts to really cure, I would take the tape out then and not before, just to prevent that it will mix up too much and will not have all these different nice colors. I wanted to have different colors, but yet a nice fade in between each color. We're using my favorite brand for resin, which is Ecopoxy, the 2-to-1 plastic resin. So the next step for us, we're finally pouring the resin, and this is the game plan. They gave me 15 metallic ecopoxy pigments. That's their new line that they carry, and unfortunately I did only 13 spaces. So at this point we're just gonna use 13 because I don't like pink and I don't like the purple anyways. But in theory, if you look at the color tone, we got the dark copper, and then we got copper, light copper or bronze, and then we're going into orange and yellow, gold, green, and then we're going into like green, blue, ocean blue, Caribbean blue, and then a little bit of purple blue. So this was supposed to go here, and then the pink would end up right here. So we're gonna throw these two out. We're just gonna do all these guys, and the plan is pretty simple. We're gonna take 1 liter of the pre-mixed resin from the big pail, dump it into the small containers, and then put these guys in and mix them all up, and then carefully pour everything into the spots. So let's do it. Now anyone that worked with resin, I guess this is one of the very cool fun part, is putting the metallics in and mixing it and seeing the color that happens once you mix it. That was really cool. That was something that I really enjoyed, and trust me, you will do too. Now check this out. So we got all the colors mixed, blah 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 blah. And look at this. This is so cool. This is actually my favorite color. Look what happens if I start to mix it. This is beautiful, and they're all like this. Look at this copper one here. Oh my goodness. Beautiful. So the next thing for us to do, we're gonna take, they're all numbered. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and then clear for this guy here. So we're gonna take one by one and pour them in and see how things work out. Let's do it. Now here I really had to be careful, and I used a little bit of common sense to understand that if I would pour in the whole resin and fill it up, the 3/4 inch or 7/8, most likely it will run to the other side. That's why we always poured only about half or a little bit more than half, moved on to the next section, moved on to the next section, and then came back and poured it all the way up so that the resin will not go over the tape, or the pressure built within that resin lake or ocean would not transfer to the next aisle. Now while I'm doing this, I'm going to use that moment to reach out to you and ask for your support for my channel. If you like what you're seeing, please hit that like button, leave a comment, share if you like the video. I would really appreciate it, and it would help me out a lot. Also, if you have any questions or anything that I didn't address at that video, make sure you leave me a comment below. That's why I'm here, and I will respond as fast as I can moving forward. With all the resin in place, it was time to torch all the bubbles by using a fire torch and running quickly over the resin. Very easy, can't really go wrong. Then it was playtime. I wanted to put in a texture and to see what it would look like, and yeah, I was too busy. It was too early for that anyways. We wouldn't need that until 8 hours later if we want to achieve a texture like that, but I just wanted to see where this would go. 5 hours later. Now from the moment we poured the resin to mixing and everything, it's been actually 8 hours, not 5 hours, and we decided now it's the good time to take out the tape and mix the resin one more time, trying to blend in the colors a little bit with each other by doing so. 3 days later. It was time to machine in the ecopoxy logo by starting removing the clear resin that we initially poured with the sander. Once I found my desired location, I printed out the ecopoxy logo and glued it onto the wood. Finally came the most exciting moment of the build, is trying my new 7-axis CNC machine. That CNC machine has 2 router heads that go in multiple directions, 12 directions in total, north and south at the same time. It's so phenomenal it had 9 axes, sorry, not 7, just to prove it as you have seen right now. Anyways, let's get on it. This machine was so awesome, I didn't have to do anything. All I had to do is run the router along the edge of the letters, very close, not trying to get through it, then sending everything away, and then using a chisel to clean everything off, and a Dremel to fine clean everything off. Phenomenal, like, didn't have to do anything. Yeah, and a little bit of blowing dust away, that happened too, that's right. It was this moment when I realized I could have been a dentist, that's right. Now before we would pour in the next batch or the final batch of the resin, it was time to sand up the surface to make sure that the resin will nicely adhere to the previous resin, and then it was time to mix it up. In this case again we're using liquid plastic 2-to-1 ratio, mixed it up by the volume, which turned out perfect, exactly what I wanted, so my math this time worked out perfectly fine. Then it was time to pour in the clear resin backwards, forward, that's what I meant to say, which was very satisfying to do and even to watch, even while doing the edit. It's still satisfying to see that happening again. Although it's not happening again because it kind of happened already, but you know what I'm trying to say here. I filled up the clear resin about 1/8 to 1/4 inch short from the live edge, which I will explain later why. And again, a fire torch was used to remove all the bubbles. Now with the live edge river pretty much complete, it was time to work on the letters. This time, however, we're using the epoxy, also by Ecopoxy, which is a top coat that cures a lot faster and is designed for thinner pores. For the metallics, we're using caviar, which is this guy here, and avocado, which is the green one, to give the logo the proper colors that they actually have on their logo. Then it was time to pour in the resin backwards, which worked really fine. You just pour in the resin, then suck it back up into the bottle, and you're done. Which is not true. What actually happened is I poured it forward, and that was just a backward play, and I tricked you completely. Ha! Got you. Three days later, it was time to disassemble the form that we initially built for the cast. And as you can see, things unfolded very easy, like a turkey sandwich.
Okay guys, here's a funny story to this. So I'm having problems obviously getting it off the form. Funny enough, I'm already putting multiple chips in there and I have the tape in there, so it should not be bonding to it at all. So I'm more than confused. The reason why it's not giving up at all, because I initially put in screws from the bottom to the melamine, that's right. Now I can see the screws ripping through the melamine, and that's why it didn't come off. Anyways, let's take the screws out from the bottom and then it should come off easily.
And yes, as you can see, once the screw were taken out, it came off very easy. We're using a track saw again to square things off and make things nice and flush and straight again, like it used to be before it never happened. Forward, let's talk about the game plan. Maybe some of you have already noticed that I have a light ridge in here. There's about 1/8 of a step in here, everywhere. And the reason why is very simple. When we poured the clear resin in here, I noticed that the huge color difference. I mean, if you would pour a clear finish over maple, it barely changes. But here, you can go from super light to all of a sudden super dark. And in my opinion, it steals away the show, which is this guy here, okay? So that's why I was like, okay, what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna pour this lower than that. And then once this is cured, I can sand it flush with the wood. And we will apply, not a clear finish, we'll apply a, what is this? This is the 311? I think white that's not the Polyex, that's the wax that they have. White tinted so that we can keep the neutral look as much as possible on the wood and pop out that resin look as much as possible. Now in here, we're gonna put a clear finish on. Initially, I thought maybe I'll get away without doing anything. However, I just don't like the texture. When you're looking at it without the reflection of the light, it looks perfect. But with the reflection of the light, you can see the small texture in the resin. So we're gonna polish that up too. Not really sure how to do it because of the live edge, but we'll figure something out. So that's the game plan. Ecopoxy offered me to use their 42-inch sender. That would have been ideal. Just run it through, put a finish on. But then again, I believe the elm wood, because of how much color it gives when you put the clear finish on, just steals too much of the show here that happens with the resin pour in the center with all the metallics. Anyways, let's do it. Let's do a lot of sanding and polishing. Yoo-hoo! Now, when it comes to sanding, the one advice that I can give you is have multiple grit sanding paper in your shop all the time. We started with 40 and went all the way to 200 on the Orbit Sender and the Belt Sender. Now the Resin River was a complete different story because we went all the way up to 3000 grit wet sanding. I decided, however, to put the Osmo finish onto the wood first, and as you can see, we're applying the finish and it barely changes or adds the color. With that complete, it was time to do the wet sanding at 3000 grit sanding paper to remove most of the scratches in the epoxy resin. Right after that, with car polishing and waxing to give that nice, rich, deep finish, see inside and all the metallics. 5 hours later. So here we are at the ecopoxy headquarters, and the first thing we're doing, we're locating the studs on the wall. It was that moment when I wish I had sawhorses, but I didn't, so we had to work on the floor. And the very first thing we're doing is we're locating or marking out where I'd like to have the Innocleat brackets positioned. Once everything marked out, it was time to put on the marking plate into these positions. Now those marking plates have only one reason: they transfer the location from the panel to the wall in where the bracket will be sitting so that you are not doing any human errors. These marking plates have a tip in the center that will transfer a dent into the wall. This way you know exactly where to put the corresponding bracket onto the wall. Once everything perfectly aligned and level, it was time to put some pressure and indent the wall. Then next step, remove the marking plates and put the actual bracket on that will fit into the exact same holes that you did for the marking plate. So we did the quick swap for all the 4 locations on that panel. Then a screw was driven through the stainless steel box into the indented spots on the wall into the studs. With everything in place, it was time to line it up, slide it in, lock it in, using set screws that will drive through the holes designed to lock it in. Now there were 2 reasons why we really wanted to use the Innocleat brackets for this application. Reason number 1 would be because you're walking past this panel from both sides all the time, and if you had a French cleat in place, you would see that all the time, where a stainless steel finish looks a lot better. Second reason was you could face mount it using face screws or nails, but then that would ruin the finish and take away the floating appearance. Okay, we're at the end of this video. I hope you've liked what you've seen today. I hope you've learned something. This was sure a challenge for me, and I'm really happy I've learned so much. It was so much fun doing this, and I hope you liked it the same way. If you did, make sure you hit that like button, leave a comment, and I hope I'll see you next time. Auf Wiedersehen.